Mhm. Yeah.
They have been making a great fuss over the South, only to blind us to what is happening here in the North. And now that the eyes of America's 20 million blacks can easily see that this white fox here in the North is even more cruel and vicious than the white wolf in the South. The Southern wolves always let you know where you stand. But these Northern foxes pose as white liberals. They pose as your friend, pose as your benefactor, pose as your employer. They pose as your landlord. They pose as the neighborhood merchant. They pose as your lawyer trying to help you. They infiltrate all your organizations, and in this manner, by joining you, they strangle your militant efforts toward freedom, toward justice, and toward equality. They use integration for infiltration throughout America, here in the North as well as the South. Masses of black people are demonstrating against the oppression and exploitation of the white man. Our people have lost all fear of the white man. They have ceased trying to waste their love on the white man. And they have ceased turning their nonviolent cheek to the violent white man. And because of this new, fearless, more militant attitude on the part of our people, we see the increase of violence and bloodshed between the white oppressor and the oppressed, between the white exploiter and the exploited, between the white slave master and his 20 million ex-slaves. And where will all of this end?
distinguished guests, brothers and sisters, ladies and gentlemen, friends and enemies. I want to point out first that I'm very happy to be here this evening, and I'm thankful for the invitation to come here to Detroit this evening. I was in a house last night that was bombed, my own, but it didn't destroy all my clothes at all, but you know what happens when fire dashes through it. They get smoky. The only thing I could get my hands on before leaving was what I have on now. And it isn't something that made me lose confidence in what I'm doing, because my wife understands, and I have children from this size on down, and even in their young age, they understand. I think they would rather have a father or brother or whatever the situation may be who will take a stand in the face of any kind of reaction from narrow-minded people, rather than to compromise and later on have to grow up in shame and in disgrace. So I just ask you to excuse my appearance. I don't normally come out in front of people without a shirt and a tie. I guess that's somewhat a holdover from the black Muslim movement, which I was in, and that's one of the good aspects of that movement. It teaches you to be very careful and conscious of how you look, which is a positive contribution on their part. But that positive contribution on their part is greatly offset by too many other liabilities. Before I get involved in anything nowadays, I have to straighten out my own position, and which is clear. I am not a racist in any form whatsoever. I don't believe in any form of racism. I don't believe in any form of discrimination or segregation. I believe in Islam. I'm a Muslim, and there's nothing wrong with being a Muslim. Nothing wrong with the religion of Islam. That just teaches us to believe in Allah as the God, and those of you who are Christians probably believe in the same God, because I think you believe in the God.
Okay, PC, you're not quite. All right. Hello, welcome. Happy day to everybody. Hope you're at your highest level of mental, physical, and spiritual well-being. And we're happy that you have decided to join us for this week's episode of Our Ancestors' Voices, a weekly program sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Welcome to our critical topic today. Everyone in the U.S. owes the Black Power movement gratitude. And so we'll talk about that. Of course, the Black Power movement has a long history, right? So, we, of course, acknowledge the work that has taken place in Azania, South Africa, around Black Power. We acknowledge the historical work of people like Edward Blyden and Paul Cuffey, people who took large segments of African populations here in the United Snakes of America and repatriated back to Africa in the 1800s, calling those movements largely Black Power. We acknowledge Richard Wright in the 50s, bringing the phrase to public consciousness. But this particular discussion today builds on all of those great contributions. Marcus Garvey, Amy Ashwood Garvey, Amy Jock Garvey, all of the work that has come up. El Hajj Malik, El Shabazz, Malcolm X, although he didn't really use the phrase Black Power, certainly once the movement gained its full expression in the late 1960s, he, more than any other single individual, was the embodiment of that movement. So we're talking about that period in the late 1960s here in the United Snakes of America, and how the work that was done contributed largely to the world that we have today. So we thank you for joining us. We give honor and respect to the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere in all of their manifestations, whether they refer to themselves as Indians, as natives, as Chicanos, as Mexicanos, Puerto Ricanos. They are the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. This is their land, and they have a right to have their lands back. And we have just been overjoyed to see the work that they have done in Los Angeles, California, just a few hours from where we are here over the last couple of days, running those ICE Gestapos out of downtown Los Angeles. That's outstanding work. Just imagine what we could do with a little organization. That's spontaneous, what they've done the last couple of days, running them out. Imagine what we could do with a little organization. You know, these racist, no good scum suckers have called in the National Guard on the people in Los Angeles. And of course, what happens typically with that, because the National Guard has a level of organization that will historically tend to quell things down. And that's why we need organizations so we can prevent that from happening. But it won't stop the spirit. They can bring their U.S. mercenary troops and use them against the people because that's what they are, but it will not stop the spirit of the struggle for justice. So we have been just overjoyed to see this happening and want to contribute to it in whatever way we possibly can. And we, of course, that spirit that was just expressed is coming from the contributions that our ancestors gave us, our African ancestors, and the legacy that they have provided to us, a wonderful, rich legacy that we are humbled and honored to carry on here in 2025 and beyond. That spirit of resistance, that spirit of never giving up, that spirit of never accepting what this system presents to us as normalized, to never accept that, to always see it as we are, as the song says, we are not, they're not like us. We are people who believe in justice and forward human progress for all of humanity. So we can never accept the lies of the capitalist system. And it is our ancestors that have given us that spirit. So we are honored, humbled, encouraged, inspired to carry on their example to the absolute best of our abilities for as long as we have breath in our bodies. So we introduce ourselves just for those that may not know. This program, again, is Our Ancestors' Voices. It's sponsored by the All African People's Revolutionary Party. Our ancestors were APRP. APRP is a revolutionary, independent, mass Pan African political party with its base in Africa. That's where we are based. We are not based anywhere else. We are not based in Los Angeles or New York or Holly Springs, Mississippi. We're based in Africa, the international home of African people all over the world. And our objective is Pan Africanism, which is defined as one unified socialist Africa. I mentioned Holly Springs. Shakura took me there when she was living in Memphis. It's only like 2 hours from Memphis. You know, the Mississippi state line's right there. And we went there because they have a wonderful museum there for Miss Ida B. Wells Barnett, who was the great abolitionist, great women's rights, anti-patriarchy fighter, African woman. And the town is a small town of like 8,000 people. It's 95% African. We went and had a wonderful soul food meal after we went to the museum there, and just a really, typically Mississippi African town. But if you saw the news the last week or so, some European walked into a bar there and acted a damn fool using the N word. He was the only European in there in Little Holly Springs, and the people made him strip naked and whooped his behind. And this. I'm telling you, this is the spirit of people today. Like people are tired of this nonsense, and I don't know what got into that clown to think he could come in there. He'd been going and listening to too many of those MAGA rallies, I guess, or something. He thought he could come in there and be disrespectful and nothing would happen, and he ended up having a very bad evening. So when we say That spirit is the same spirit which will bring about Pan Africanism for us, which is one unified socialist Africa. Because we know that our problem is not just in Holly Springs, Mississippi. It's not just in New York or LA or the Bay Area or Chicago. It's not just in Toronto. It's not just in Montreal. It's not just in Mexico City or Panama City. It's not just in San Juan, Puerto Rico. It's not just in Havana, Cuba. It's not just in the Dominican Republic. It's not just in Port-au-Prince, Haiti. It's not just in Buenos Aires, Argentina. Our problem as African people is not just in Hamburg, Germany, or London, England, or Paris, France. Our problem is related to the subjugation of Africa, our mother. That is the root of our problem. And it is the reason why we're in all these places I just named. The subjugation of Africa is the reason why we're in these places. So the redemption of the African continent is the key to salvation for the African masses. And it's also the best way that we can bring self determination for our people, as well as contributing towards other oppressed people. As we win, we move closer to one unified socialist Africa. That helps the indigenous people of the Western Hemisphere. As they win here, that helps us. It helps the Palestinian people. As they win, that helps us. So we're not in isolation. We're not that stupid. We know that the world has us interconnected. That's dialectics. We don't lead with identity politics or emotionalism. We lead with science, and dialectics shows us clearly that our struggle, whether we want to admit it or not, whether we like it or not, it's linked to everything else happening in the world. So our work to achieve Pan-Africanism you can find in the book on the screen. Hopefully you're looking at it. The Handbook of Revolutionary Warfare by Kwame Nkrumah lays out our strategy. We're carrying that out. And the program is hosted each week by myself and Dr. Shakura Umi, my biological, ideological daughter. So to get us started, right now on this wonderful topic of owing a regret to the Black Power movement of the 60s, I'll turn it over to Shakura.
Thank you. Appreciate you. Thanks. Thank you, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you. All right. Greetings, everyone. We hope that you are well. So, thank you so much for joining us today. What an exciting topic, right? For us to be able to continue to commemorate and show gratitude and appreciation. For some, this might be a great learning experience because you may not really know how this African movement has been able to contribute to all of us being in the positions that we are in today. But that's what we plan to talk about today. And I love that we're tying it into how all of us can acknowledge what others have sacrificed for us to be here today. That's going to be really key because we always say every weekend that we're trying to help you all understand that we live in a capitalist society which trains us and teaches us to think and to feel and to embrace being individualistic in every aspect. So, to completely be self absorbed, to completely be self interest and driven by self interest, and to not have any consideration for how your choices affect other people or any consideration for how others who have sacrificed have allowed you to be in the positions that you're in today. That's going to be really key as we continue to think more about this because I think that's also the intention of capitalism is if we continue to be individualistic then we're going to continue to be isolated. And if we continue to think isolated thoughts and if we continue to feel like we are isolated, then we won't really start to draw connections and we won't really start to see how other people's sacrifices are linked to other people's oppression today. This is exactly why we're always talking about the Palestinian struggle. This is why we're talking about our Asian descent comrades and their struggle, the indigenous people and their struggle. We constantly are telling you how the connections with the African struggle is linked to these others. And so being able to see all of that is only because we are either a part of organizations that are working for justice or we have been in organizations that are working for justice where we are trained to kind of see what those linkages look like. And if you're not doing that because you're thinking individualistically and you're not organizing for the betterment of humanity, then you're not going to be able to see that, especially not under capitalism. That's opposite of what capitalism stands for. So I'm excited for us to pay homage today and to think about how people throughout the world, nowhere in a time of history or herstory or their story, nowhere in that time have people been able to just give up power voluntarily, meaning we didn't necessarily just say, yeah, I don't really want to have this power. You can take it. It's always been by struggle. And so, no one is hearing that this can provide an example because mass power transfer has taken place always with intense struggle and extreme sacrifices. And being able to break that down, like I said, is going to be really key. Thinking bigger than yourself, thinking bigger than how you got here and how your family got here, and understanding that for you to be able to possibly be in a air conditioned facility right now, to feel the comfort of the air conditioned facility, for you to possibly be in an environment where you have a roof over your head. And although you may not be able to guarantee, all of your bills are paid, for the most part, you feel safe in the environment that you're in today. You feel comfortable in the environment that you're in today. That is not without the struggles and sacrifices of every single one of our ancestors. And we have to acknowledge that. We have to acknowledge it. From our ancestors who were digging their nails at the point of no return, in Accra, West Africa, Ghana, to our ancestors who jumped overboard, to our ancestors who were sexually assaulted by European colonizers of indigenous descent, to the ancestors of Asian descent who were violated through the Japanese internment camps and through the Chinese Exclusion Act, to our ancestors, even of Irish descent, who have continued to been victimized and brutalized and terrorized by the British for taking over and colonizing. We all can think of examples of folks who have laid down, quite literally, so that we could be here today. They literally decided whether they wanted to fight or run and fight later, or decide that they wanted to organize an army, decided that they didn't want to take this sitting down. They had to make those choices, those very difficult choices. Some of these ancestors left their children behind. Some of these ancestors weren't able to give birth to their children. Some of these ancestors have no idea where their children are because of the sacrifices that they made. For all of us to sit and to use the cobalt and the coltan that comes from Africa to be wired into this virtual program right here, right now. It is so real. And this is why it is bigger than us. That's what we've continuously said. And that is why that is the case. Because none of us would be here without that. And I mean biologically, but I also mean ideologically and emotionally. Everything that these folks have put into us, it has transcended through generations. So just like they had a lot on their shoulders and they had big responsibilities to fulfill and to make this world better, and they did, we are no different than them. And we must understand that. We must stop thinking about how we pulled ourselves up by our bootstraps. That is simply not a true statement. It's not. It's not a true statement. Somebody somewhere sacrificed for you to be in the positions you're in today, for you to have the vehicle that you drive, for you to be able to get the bus pass that you have, for you to have the bicycle that you have. However you get around with your transportation, someone struggled. For you to have access to the resources that you have, for you to be in the class status that you're in, somebody struggled for you to be able to do that. And you may not even know who that person was that struggled, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't pay them any homage less. That certainly doesn't mean that. And so just thinking more about that, we can even break it down and thinking about how the lie that has been continuously perpetuated under propaganda is that power can change hands and cause us to be can cause us to be in oppressive structures where the narratives of people are already in power. That's where that lie kind of consists in terms of what we're looking at. It allows us to kind of think about how, because power has moved through different hands, through different oppressors, through different violators and terrorists and things of that nature, that oppressive power structure has continued to maintain itself. But that doesn't mean that the people, the masses of people, have been any less significant and therefore what's the word I'm looking for, any less significant and therefore successful in A, retrieving that power once again, or B, being able to maintain it now that they have it. And again, like, this is the criteria, this is the importance, and this is why it's critical for us to think on a larger level and to be able to kind of think about what it means to increase our political education, because then we can be in a better position to resist the propagandized information that's being thrown at us that simply is not true and simply does not articulate what it is that is based on value and reality at the end of the day. And so, just thinking about how our movements have been criticized, it's very common for us to hear that capitalism is this piece where we are in a position where that is not that they don't support change. It is that they don't support the way that we go about creating change. And under capitalism, that's the ideology that's been perpetuated, is that, people who are resisting are not in a way of supporting change. When in actuality, we want to look at how that change is being created. We want to think about how many people are being represented when that change is being created. Are all voices being heard? Are people still being silenced and therefore they cannot speak what kind of change they want to take place? Are people being left out? Are people being ignored? Are people being excluded? Are people being overlooked? Are people being dehumanized for this change to take place? I would argue if the answer to any of those questions is yes, then therefore I do have a problem with how that change is being created. And we need to look at some different options so that we don't have to continue to practice some of the same processes that capitalism practices. Otherwise, we're no different than them. The protectors of oppression never agree with the tactics that we have used to end oppression. They didn't agree with the resistance against colonialism. They didn't agree with the resistance against slavery. They didn't agree with the resistance against apartheid, Jim Crow, and they never will. They don't agree now. They don't agree now. They don't think now that people who are oppressed deserve to not be oppressed. They don't even agree that oppression still exists. They don't agree that people are living with less than others. They don't agree that some people have social advantages than other people. They don't agree with any of that. They don't think that any of those things are an issue. And that's why they will say to us, if you're so unhappy, go back to Africa, because they're not in a position to really be able to humbly think about what's going on and why things are so difficult for folks to just literally live and have a peaceful day. I wouldn't even say life, but just to get through the day without capitalism getting in your way at any point in that 24 hours. I mean, that's extremely difficult to do because capitalism is embedded in every single thing that we do, even when we go to sleep at night. Even when we go to sleep at night, it is embedded in that. If you don't agree with me, I encourage you, if you can tonight when you go to sleep, to just think about all the dreams that you have and think about how they are influenced by media and propaganda that you are exposed to every day. We can't even sleep in peace, you all. We can't even sleep in peace without capitalism coming in. So, yeah, they don't agree that we're saying that there's a problem, and they're not supposed to agree. Their job is to support capitalism, to perpetuate it, to strengthen it, to enforce it. That is their job. Our job, if you're on here and you believe in humanity, your job, our job, is to resist that and to deconstruct it and to tear it down and to do anything that we can do to make sure that it has no integrity left so that therefore it crumbles. That is our job. If we want to, pun intended, sleep with a good conscience at night, that is our job. That's always been our job because we also understand that supporting capitalism is not going to help us do what we need to do. If we want to be in a position where we can live in a comfortable space, as we talked about, then we know that capitalism has to go. We know that imperialism has to go. We know that groups of people who are colonized and don't have their land, they're going to need to get their land back. We know that that is a fact. We know that. It's not going to be sustainable if we don't fight for that. And we can't just fight to get our land back. Meanwhile, other groups are still without, because that means that the opportunity of threat is still existing. And the injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere, according to our good Dr. King. So, this is why it's so important for us to think about that. And of course, with the US Black Power movement, unapologetic to the US capitalism, will forever be criticized by this system. because we have been in a position where they have completely made their case very clear that they have no intention of supporting capitalism. They never had an intention of supporting it. And even to this day, when I think about going through the Lorraine Motel in Memphis, you can have all the critiques in the world about what it's missing and what it needs to have. But I do appreciate that as you're moving through the museum, there is a very clear hall that is dedicated to the African Black Power movement, because now you're able to really start to see just how much of a needle movement, if you will, this movement has been in terms of changing the trajectory of how we were seen by society, how we chose to be seen by society, how we wanted people to perceive us, and how we wanted to determine what that perception is. That kind of agency that our ancestors let out. Those of us who were a part of the sit ins, those of us who were a part of intentionally sitting in and trying our best to practice disciplined actions while other people were dehumanizing us and putting human residue on us, if you understand what I'm saying, biological saliva and whatnot, being able to see the importance of us trying to practice what it meant to demand, not ask, demand for decency, demand for humanity, demand to be treated like the humans that we are, when we are resisting this propaganda that teaches society that we are not even full humans, but instead three-fifths, right? So it's all these pieces together. And again, like we can see this in other spaces, right? Like I would argue with the indigenous people, clearly stealing their land is one of the best ways that you can dehumanize them. But I would also argue being mistruthful and killing thousands of genocide indigenous people. I would argue bringing blankets and diseases and violating their people that are bisexual assault. Like I would argue all of those things have the very same weight when it comes to comparing the African struggle to the indigenous struggle. I would argue it's the same with the Palestinian struggle today. So the point we're trying to make is it's ironic that these oppressors have had the nerve to call us out of our names and to call us, less than humans, and to call us animals, and to call us savages, and to say that we are dehumanized and that we don't have the ability to function as humanity. But they're the ones that are actually practicing those same techniques. They're the ones that are behaving as if they have no humanity in them. And as our good friend Kwame Ture said, if you are to assume, let me look because it's right on top. If you are to assume that in order for nonviolence to work, your opponent must have a conscience and the United States has none, I really think that is the best quote. Like, it is the best quote for us talking about this particular situation. We can't assume that they have humanity because that would argue that they have a conscience. And if they actually had a conscience, then they wouldn't be treating those that they think are less than as the way that they've been treating them. There also wouldn't be a system where people can literally be assessed based on what kind of value they offer. So this classism piece is also a thing that we need to consider, because that's also a way that we continue to divide out and to separate and to continue to individualize us. So being aware of those things, being able to push back against them, being able to speak about them, and finding ways that we can continue to bring in the influences that this African movement has had, being able to bring in conversations, helping people to understand, well, if it wasn't for, our African ancestors, a lot of these things that we enjoy today wouldn't even be the reality that they are. Not just for African people, but for all people. And Baba Ajamu is going to talk more about what some of those examples look like.
Right. Thank you, Shakura.
Please.
Appreciate it. And I just want to start by I was reached out to after last week's program, reached out by someone who watched it, and they said you need to you call a bunch of our people coons, and you need to apologize. You owe the people an apology. So I want to apologize. I want to apologize to the ancestors for not going harder than I did. I want to apologize for not calling out every single sellout and coon that's out there. That's what I told the person. I'm like, well, if you really expect us to apologize, you reached out to the wrong people. Nobody's the only apology is owed to us for having to live and suffer through these conditions for the masses of humanity. So yeah, I told you, you got to be out of your damn mind reaching out to me thinking you need to go back and have yourself a drink or whatever you need to do to get your mind right, whatever. But let's talk about the proper history, right? Um, so Black Power properly analyzed, of course, goes back, as I alluded to in the very beginning, goes all the way back to the beginning of human society, right? We had communal societies. We had that pretty much all over the world. The lowest level of economic social production is communalism, right? But it had its very positive manifestations, which would be collectivism, is a central component of communalism. And in fact, we would argue that communalism provides much of the impetus for communism, which we've never achieved yet, but we will one day. So, going back to that period, thousands of years ago, where we had communalism and that was dominant around most of the world, every people had dignity. Every people functioned on a day-to-day basis to represent themselves, to encounter the conditions that they faced, to shape them, and to create that legacy for future generations. That's what culture is, right? So every people did that. There's not a people on the planet Earth who did not do that, who did not make those types of contributions. Everybody did that. And that's what is meant by the term evolution. Everybody came from one state and did the proper work to evolve, quote unquote, into a more advanced state. Like that was the nature of human development. The problem is, of course, this onslaught of colonialism that happened 500 plus years ago. And this process interrupted that evolution. So now we don't have that evolution as a natural process because colonialism created conditions where the people who engaged in the colonialism were at a much faster rate of development because they were stealing all the resources from the people they colonized. And so now you don't have that ability. You don't have, as they call it, an equal playing field. And you haven't had that for 500 plus years. And the conditions that colonialism put into place 500 years ago are still in place now. That's why if you're in these so-called industrialized countries, these capitalist countries, you have, full access to electricity, you have full access to internet, you have the ability to have access to food and clothing and shelter and all these things. And the majority of people on Earth don't have ready access to those things. That's because of the imbalances that were created by this onslaught of colonialism. So, Black Power was a methodology by African people to resist that process. It was an anti colonial movement. That's what the Black Power movement was. And if you fast forward a little bit, it talks about, colonialism's intrusion and our methods of resistance to that process. Whether you talk about the 40-year struggle in Angola led by Sister Nzinga against the Portuguese, whether you talk about the Labodi in Ghana, in Accra, who battled the British so relentlessly that the British eventually said, well, let's just go attack some other ethnic groups and leave them alone because we every time we go up against them, like that cracker that was in Holly Springs, we have a very bad day. So that, like all of the resistance struggles up and down the Central African coast, right? From what used to be known as Dahomey all the way down to Namibia, the resistance, the fortified resistance against the slave masters and the colonizers, which are well documented, right, that happened. Looking at all of the struggles, the Qualimo struggles that happened in the Caribbean and in South America. And if you don't know what Qualimbos are, the Maroon societies is another way that they're articulated. These were pockets of resistance that were organized among African people and indigenous people in unity with one another So this is our history, right? We didn't make this up. This is our history of who we are. So that's why we're just saying, like, you have to understand how we've come to where we are now, because the Black Power movement is just simply a manifestation, the latest manifestation, or not the latest, but a later manifestation of the things I just got through talking about. Whether you talk about the Garvey movement of 100 years ago, to where we are today, and the transformation of the civil rights movement into a Black Power movement in the 1960s, it's a critical stage that's really not talked about a lot. Like, and I get it, because the capitalist system wants to wipe out the Black Power movement phase of the 1960s. They don't want you to know about that. They want to redefine the civil rights movement. They want to eliminate that too, but that's a lot more entrenched in the psychology of people, because people understand basic things about that, like, the who has the vote and how they got it, and the fact that, Jim Crow segregation was eradicated due to the civil rights movement in this country. So people understand those basic concepts. So it's much harder to eliminate the civil rights movement, but they are certainly at work creating intense propaganda to redefine it. And the redefinition of it is that, well, the civil rights movement was all about nonviolence, turning the cheek. So the purpose of that is to get you to believe that any analysis and work that you do has to be in based upon the rules provided to you by the capitalist system, by our enemies. And anybody that suggests doing anything outside of that paradigm is insane. That's what they do. That's what they do with that type of propaganda, is convince you. And if you think about it, even if you don't have that problem, family or friends who do. Anybody that talks about doing anything outside of voting, for example, voting in the capitalist system, is insane. It's never going to work. It's not even worth talking about, because it's just nothing can work outside of the parameters that our enemies give us. That's their propaganda tool to convince us of that. And so that's how they attempted to redefine the civil rights movement. And with the Black Power movement, they've worked tirelessly to just wipe it out completely. Or if they can't wipe it out, to convince you that it was a period of utter confusion among our people. So this is why, when the late Congressperson John Lewis, who was obviously very active in the U.S. civil rights movement in the '60s, when he passed away a couple of years ago, and that cracker Bill Clinton was speaking at his eulogy, that's the reason why Clinton said we almost lost the civil rights movement. I don't eat crackers or graham crackers, so I can't remember. But paraphrasing, he said something to the effect of, "We almost lost the movement to Stokely," quote unquote, something to that effect. So that's what he meant, is that this period they're trying to portray as a period where we were confused, but there was no confusion about the Black Power movement in the '60s in this country. That movement was all about reflecting our dignity as African people. And when the call went out on the hot, dusty road in Mississippi in June of 1966, when the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee organizers went out in front of the March Against Fear, and they worked with the sharecroppers, and they got people uh, fired up around the concept of Black Power. And when the march came to Greenwood, Mississippi, and they usually would chant about freedom now, the SNCC organizers, led by people like Mukasa Dada, and of course Kwame Ture, who was Stokely Carmichael. Mukasa, who is still with us and still very active, was a speaker at African Liberation Day last weekend, and of course one of my mentors, just like Kwame was. Um, they said Black Power, and the people responded to that. And that launched the latest phase of the Black Power movement in this country, which eventually evolved into the Black Panther Party of self-defense, and then the Black Panther Party, and all of the other organizations that were committed to the concept of Black Power. And what they meant, essentially, there were a lot of efforts to confuse the meaning of it, but we know what they meant by Black Power when they said it. We knew what they meant by it when they said it in Greenwood in June of 1966. What they were saying is that we as African people have the right to determine our existence and our destiny, and we can do that by any means necessary. And it doesn't matter what the US or the world capitalist imperialist system thinks about us. We are going to define ourselves the way we want to do it. And if you don't like it, to hell with you. That's what it meant. Clearly, that's what Black Power meant. No question about that. Yeah, it all of the how what is the economic plan? What is all that? Yeah, all that needed to be further worked out. But clearly, that's what was meant by the movement, and it began to manifest itself. If you look at what happened, it ushered in these examples of dignity that carried outside of the African community in the U.S. to the African communities all over the world, and carried outside of the African community. Period. For example, when we say we're going to do what we want, whether we like it or not, one of the manifestations was our cultural presentation. Like people began to wear afros. That's where that happened. They began to stop frying and dyeing their hair. They began to stop trying to make their hair look like the way Europeans wear their hair and to wear our hair in its natural state. We began to wear African clothes. Who the hell said that a suit and tie is professional attire? Who made that decision? You didn't vote on that. You didn't decide that. Somebody told you that. And they've been telling you that your whole life. So you've accepted it. Well, that's professional attire. That ain't no goddamn professional. That's European attire. That's what that is. It's European attire. Nothing else. Nothing greater, nothing less. It's European attire. If I wear a nice jacquard West African outfit, that's just as professional, whatever the hell that word is supposed to mean. It's just as legitimate as any other style of dress. If you wear native indigenous clothes, Asian clothes, that's just as legitimate as a suit, Armani suit, or any of that bullshit that they have told us our whole life is how we need to dress to be taken seriously. That's propaganda. That's all that is. So the Black Power movement's objective was to blow all that up and say that the way we are as African people is just fine. And we have a right to do that. And that spread to other communities. That's what was meant by Black is beautiful. That slogan, which was popular in the 60s, Black is beautiful. It's just saying that we are just fine the way we are. And that manifestation continues. What do you think Kendrick Lamar meant when he was in the song he's talking about we gonna be all right? That's the same message as Black is beautiful. It's the same message saying that we are just fine the way that we are. And it's not an accident that Dennis Banks and Clyde Belcourt in Minneapolis in 1966, when they founded the American Indian movements, they were heavily influenced by the Black Power movement. They said that. I didn't say that for them. That's what they said. And the same with the Chicano liberation movement. The same with the Brown Berets. All of these movements, the women's liberation movement, all of that was a reflection of, yeah, you need to accept us the way we are, or to hell with you. That's what that's a manifestation of. So just there, like all of that is in part, I think every community was going to arrive at that on their own anyway. I don't think that any community claims credit for another community's cultural contributions to their liberation. That's not what we're saying. But what we're saying is that the Black Power movement certainly opened that doorway in this country, and it did. They didn't need us to do that. Things could have happened differently, and they could have opened the door for the Black Power movement. But that's what happened. That's the history. That's how it happened. And this consciousness inspired all marginalized groups, as we're saying, to act in the same fashion. And there were many other manifestations of that. Questions began to be raised. Like if you have an immigrant family, right? And you've immigrated here from Africa or Asia or Central South America or the Caribbean. The Black Power movement had a lot to do with that, because before 1965, the immigration process in this country was carried out based on a quota system. Look it up for yourself. Don't believe us. There was a quota system. There was a racial quota system. And I say racial because the quota system was based on countries that had a percentage of people who were migrating here, and that was 90% Europe. So there's no question it was a racial quota system before 1965. And what the Black Power movement did is it challenged that and it pushed for legislation along with the other communities to eliminate that. And in 1965, you see these crackers on the screen, Lyndon Johnson and Robert F. Kennedy and Hubert Humphrey and all these crackers. And some of you Africans are really something because you look at John F. Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Teddy Kennedy, and you talk about the Kennedys were our friend. That's three Ks. I mean, I shouldn't have to tell you what that means. I mean, them crackers were never our friends. That's why you shouldn't be like if you know the history, you're not surprised by the one that's here now acting a damn fool. Because they never have been our friends. Just study the history. The person that put the wiretaps on Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s phone was Robert F. Chick Kennedy in that picture right there. That's who did that. And the reason why Kennedy was assassinated by this man Sirhan is because Robert Kennedy was one of the first people to introduce national legislation to support the state of Israel. So these people were not our friend. Like, y'all stop all that nonsense, that liberal bourgeoisie nonsense. But I digress. The 1965 Immigration Reform Act eliminated the quotas, the racial quotas. And so while 90% of the immigration occurred from Europe before 1965, after this act, 90% of the immigration since 1965 has been from Africa, Asia, Central, South America, and the Caribbean. And this is what these people are upset about right now because they are afraid that they're going to lose their place. And they should lose their, it's not their country. They should lose their place. They have no place here. I told a man the other day that reached out and he was saying, well, we need to, I was doing security and he's like, these people are illegal. I'm like, you're the one that's illegal. He's like, you shouldn't even be here. He's like, well, I'm legal. I was born. I'm like, I don't give a damn. You're still a colonizer and you shouldn't be here. We were having a pro-immigration march. He's walking by. You're illegal. And I'm like, you're illegal. You're the one that's illegal. Get the hell out of here. And he's like, well, we're all immigrants. I'm like, I'm not no damn immigrant. Your ancestors stole my people and forced us here. And I'm thinking, well, why don't you leave? I said, because I'm here to get back to everything you stole from us. In fact, if you stand there 2 more minutes, I'm going to start taking your damn clothes off of you. Then he left. So they're witnesses if you think I'm lying. That's exactly what happened. We're not playing with these fools anymore. We're sick of that. We're tired of that. Clearly, what's happening around the world is illustrating that. If you're paying attention to what's happening in the Sahel and Africa, you're seeing that. If you're paying attention to what's happening throughout the Caribbean, you're seeing that. If you're paying attention to, I mentioned what happened in LA against, you see people are sick of this nonsense, as they should be. The only thing that's missing is proper organization. That's where we come in. That's the work that we have to do. And so this is why the question of immigration is so high today. But the increased consciousness about the limitations of capitalism and its inability to solve our problem, and this has created this narrative where, okay, so we don't want them to look at capitalism. So instead, like Lyndon Johnson in the picture said in 1966, all you have to do to get a white man to support, I'm quoting him, to support you is keep telling him he's better than a Negro. So this is the what they call uh, um, the strategy that they've been using for decades, the Southern strategy. That's still very much in existence today. And that's why they promote things like the Black Power movement like it's anti-white. That's a whole new element of the Southern strategy to do that. So, if you understand that, it's a couple of things are clear. The Black Power movement opened this country up. It made it so that as Kwame was speaking at a college in the 90s, the African students were fussing over him and the young European student had a ponytail, and the young European student was asking, "Well, who is this guy?" And Kwame was there to speak, and Kwame heard him, and Kwame looked at him and told him, I'm the reason you can wear that ponytail. So if you want to sum up the Black Power movement, that's it. Before the Black Power movement, it was young white men with crew cuts in everything. Nobody else was welcome. And what the Black Power movement did is blow all that up and create all of these opportunities for everybody to come in. And problem with that is we didn't understand that they were doing it as a strategic objective to try and integrate us into the capitalist system. So that's what they've been doing the last 50 years. And that's the reason why we have halted the movement towards liberation in this country. And now it's about this black excellence, whatever the hell that's supposed to be, and rooting for everybody black and all this petty bourgeoisie stuff that is focused around us fitting within the capitalist system. But like everything else in this system, the system always compromises and distorts everything. So they have distorted black power to mean identity politics. And by that, we mean because you're black, you're right. Okay, basically. That's all that's required is for you to be black and you're right. No class analysis at all. Like Barack Obama is black, so he's right. No class analysis at all. We don't even know what's meant when people say class analysis. We don't even know what that means. That's what they did to us. If you don't know, if I ask you right now, what's a class analysis, and you cannot answer, you have been thoroughly propagandized by the capitalist system. No question about it. If you don't know it, we're here to tell you that that's what's going on. So we have to develop a class analysis, right? We have to understand that all of these things are designed to convince us that progress can be measured by individual advancement into the capitalist system. And that's not how progress can be measured. Every African that makes any kind of advancement into the capitalist system, it's only because of our collective struggle that allowed them to do that. So how the hell can the struggle be defined by individual advancement? It can never be that's a trick from our enemies. That's why only a few of us are able to do that, and most of us continue to suffer. That's the reason for that. And we say that because we know that heads did not get crushed and people were not lynched, and we did not have all of the people murdered during the civil rights and black power movements in this country. And it was hundreds of people that were murdered. Don't believe those lies. When the civil rights workers were looking for the bodies of uh, James Chaney, Michael Schwerner, and Andrew Goodman in Philadelphia, Mississippi in 1964, the three civil rights workers, the SNCC and CORE workers that were murdered by the sheriff Ku Klux Klan. They should have just put up there on the office, Sheriff Ku Klux Klan office. They should do that today. Police Ku Klux Klan office. Um, when they did that, when they were looking for the bodies, do you know they found several other bodies of rights workers who had disappeared? And that every time that they were looking for people who had vanished, who were engaged in civil rights work, they found other people who had been murdered and buried in shallow graves, whatever. So there were many people who were murdered. And then if we, as we should, add on to the state initiated murders during the Black Power era, there were 30 something Black Panther Party members who were murdered in police instigated sabotage, right? There was plenty of that. So that's why we say hundreds. That's what happened is hundreds of people. And if we look internationally, it'd be thousands, right? So we know that none of that happened um, just so we could get a few millionaires. Just all of that didn't happen. All the people that were beat, paralyzed, all the people who lost their jobs, lost their land, lost their health, everything suffered. They beat Miss Hamer so bad that the two men that beat her had to be hospitalized. All of those people, all that suffering, just so you could get Tyler Perry and Oprah Winfrey and Denzel Washington and Ice Cube. That's not that's not why all that happened. And it didn't happen so that you could get a check from the capitalist system calling it reparations. So you could get a payout from the capitalist system. That was not why that struggle was waged. We don't want no checks from the capitalist system. We work, we wage slave to get money to finance our work in this movie. We don't want any. I don't want them to give me a damn thing because I don't want them to be able to say they gave me anything. We stand on the dignity of our people and our struggle. And we don't want to, we don't negotiate with terrorists anyway. So we don't want to sit down and negotiate no money with those terrorists. There's no amount of money they have, trillions, zillions, whatever comes after that, that can uh, qualitatively address the suffering our people have experienced 500 plus years. There's no price that could do that. The only thing that could come close to that is the total liberation and unification of Africa under a scientific socialist government. And they can't do that for us. We have to do that for ourselves. So that's what we're talking about. And the last point is that, as Kwame Ture said, history moves, people's consciousness moves, it doesn't stand still. So if Black Power was an advancement over civil rights, and we certainly think that it was, then Pan Africanism is the highest expression of Black Power. Because if Black Power was you have to accept us as we are, then Pan Africanism is now we add the power to determine our destiny to that narrative. And that power is in land, and that land is Africa. And so that is the reason why Kwame Ture went from civil rights to Black power to Pan Africanism. That is the reason why most of us went from some interpretation of Black power to Pan Africanism. It's the natural progression to go to Pan Africanism. If you are saying someone who's saying, yeah, I believe in empowerment for Black people, if you're serious and you study and you're engaged in work, there's nowhere else you can go except to Pan Africanism. It's the highest expression of Black power. It is, when it's realized, the full embodiment of Black power because it'll give us the access to the resources we need to redetermine our lives. And if you had a time machine and you went back to June of 1966 and you asked all those sharecroppers in Mississippi who came out and chanted Black Power, if you had the ability to have resources to determine your own life, would that be Black Power to you? All of them would have to say yes. And the only way we can do that is with a free, united, and socialist Africa. It'll never come from US capitalism or British capitalism or Canadian capitalism or capitalism in Africa. It'll never come from that. It can only come from a united socialist Africa. So, Black Power, we all owe gratitude to because it brought us to this point. It opened up our consciousness. It made us understand that we are okay the way we are and that we can build our movements and our struggle the way we want to. We can redefine ourselves the way we want to. But we would argue that those were valuable contributions, but its most valuable contribution was in preparing us to understand that our power lies in the liberation of Africa. So we thank you for joining us. And we want to invite you back next week. We want to talk about on June 15th, the Kwame Ture they never told you about. We want to talk about elements of Kwame Ture that you don't know, you won't know just looking at his speeches, although it's wonderful if you're looking at his speeches. But we're going to talk about some of those. So tune in next week, same time, same place. And the red and white QR code upper left has a lot of valuable information in it, APRP programs, other than this one, including this one, the Forward Ever shop where you can buy Pan-African clothing, which we certainly want to ask you to do. And you can access the link to hoodcommunists.org, which is a revolutionary Pan-African blog, which you should support. And for those of you in Northern California, the flyer on the left of the screen, we want to invite you A week from tomorrow, June 16th, on Monday, 6 to 8 p.m., we have our monthly AAPRP teach-in at the Shakur Center, 3320 Broadway, here in Sacramento, California. The topic, Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso, and what we can and should do, breaking down what's happening in Burkina Faso and the Sahel, and what that means for us here in other parts of the world as African people and peace and justice loving people. So everyone's welcome. So come on out to that. Check that out. The blue and white QR code at the bottom. You still should support African Liberation Day. We've concluded African Liberation Day commemorations, but we hosted them all over the world. So whatever you can scan there and contribute is greatly appreciated. And we certainly want to invite you to join the All African People's Revolutionary Party. You can do that at the website at the bottom, www.aaprp-intl.org. You can watch a video and be invited to an orientation, be connected to an AAPRP organizer closest to you, and we can make that happen. And the bottom right QR code, become a monthly sponsor. This is our on the ground AAPRP work in Burkina Faso and now Niger as well. So you can go in there, scan that code to find out how you can become a monthly sponsor. You don't have to sponsor $500 a month. You can sponsor 10 US dollars a month. That's helpful. And you can do that. That's just, one six pack less. You should be doing that anyway. So go ahead and do that. It's important. It's essential that we support our struggle, right? And then my book at the upper right, want to again encourage you to buy it, tell people to buy it, contact your local library, get it in there, organize book clubs and have people do it. Because one, it's a great organizing book, if I can humbly say so myself. And two, all of the proceeds from it I use for anti-fascist work. I'm teaching self-defense classes every Thursday night here, 30 some odd people. I want to buy materials. This is marginalized people. So, I don't want to tell them go out and buy pads, but I can't buy pads for everyone. So the more people that buy the book, the better positioned I am to do that. A guide for organizing defense against white supremacist, patriarchal, and fascist violence. It's only $8 US. Yes, it's only available on Amazon. If you have a printing press where I can send books around the world free, print around the world free, then let me know. Otherwise, I don't want to hear a damn thing you have to say about Amazon, because I'm trying to use the master's tools to liberate us. And I'm sick of people. Well, why did you use Amazon? Well, why did you open your damn mouth? Because clearly you don't know anything about organizing, right? Like, I don't have a printing press here. I don't have free shipping around the world. I don't have that. So this is a way I can do that. And I've dealt with multiple publishers, and I hate to say it, but they've been the most honest ones. Unfortunately, I wish it wasn't true. I've been robbed by 3 different publishers. So buy the book, please, so we can support anti-fascist work and do that. Stop these Klansmen and neo-Nazis and police from terrorizing our people and other peace and justice loving people. So please do that. Just take a second to go on Amazon and buy the book. You can close your eyes and do it if it bothers you, but you should be closing your eyes when you go to the gas station, closing your eyes when you go to the supermarket, because it's all capitalism, right? But you got to eat. You got to put gas in your car. Well, we got to put books out there that bring about revolutionary consciousness. So we thank you for joining us. Forward ever, backwards never. Enjoy the rest of your evening.